Attention, you're listening to the Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Well, that is right, my friends. I appreciate you tuning in to America's home for conservative, not bitter talk. My pleasure to be here with you today. You know, as we're looking at the chaos and the pandemonium that has erupted, primarily in Minnesota. But by the way, this is not just in Minnesota, what's happening. And let me say this, I've seen a poll, a couple of polls that have come out. 59% of voters, according to a Fox News poll, say ICE is, quote, too aggressive. That came out yesterday. The day before that, January 27th, Reuters Ipsos poll, 58% of Americans say ICE enforcement efforts go, quote, too far. Whatever that's supposed to mean specifically. I want to talk about this today. What is enforcement, and what does it look like, and what is too far, and what is too aggressive? Well, I can tell you those things, and we'll get into that today, my friends. I'm apparently in the minority on this, but we'll talk about it here as the program unfolds. Before we get started, though, my friends, if you are concerned about the reality out there that we're in this fight, this ideological fight, this cold civil war, and you understand that there's multiple fronts in this cold civil war, you know that sometimes it's difficult to figure out ways as a conservative to navigate a certain element or aspect of your life, especially when you're trying to be ideologically consistent. One of those areas that can sometimes prove difficult is the way that you invest your money. That's why I love what the team at 48 Financial is doing. They specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith, your values, so you're not funding things that go completely against what you believe in. They do the heavy lifting, help align your investments with your purpose, with your goals, with your values, with your beliefs. The best part, they do all of that for you, and all you have to do is take a quick, easy assessment at 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. Take a quick assessment, and they'll tell you to what degree your investments align with your values, with your principles. So, 48 Financial, they're here to worry about your money, my friends, so you don't have to. All right. So, the question here is, what should law enforcement look like, again, specifically as it pertains to immigration law, deportations, and so forth, but not just that. Think about any issue. It doesn't have to be immigration. It can be anything that's in the law that law enforcement is given the responsibility of dealing with. So, when people say, I referenced two polls off the top, 59% of folks in a Fox News poll say ICE is, quote, too aggressive. 58% in a Reuters Ipsos poll say ICE agents or ICE enforcement efforts have gone too far. So then the question is this: what are we talking about here? And what is law enforcement? And how should it look? What should it do? So let's back up here. We've got a nation of free people. This is after, by the way, we're approaching our 250th birthday here in the United States, July 4th, 2026. America will be 250. As I think I said yesterday, I'm not sure America would have reached her 250th birthday had Kamala Harris or Joe Biden been elected president. I don't know. But we're on our way. There's going to be a massive celebration, a UFC fight at the White House, which for UFC fans is about as cool as it gets. So we've got this stuff going on. There's going to be a big party, make no mistake about it, that Trump the Trump administration is going to throw for America reaching 250 years old. But when we founded this country, my friends, the founders, I've gone through this before, could have easily said that they're in charge now. They're in charge now, and they're going to run things the way that they want to run them. They're going to become the new tyrant class, the new ruling class in town, and tell Americans how to live. But they didn't do that. They did something profound and spectacular and absolutely wonderful that's resulted in so much positive in this country, in your life, in my life, and around the world. They basically said, look, there's not going to be a new government that's going to waltz in here and then tell the people, the new set of rules. There's a new sheriff in town, whatever. They said what we're going to do is we're going to write the perspective. We're going to come at this from a perspective of a collective group of people that are going to then tell the government what it can do, turning it on its head, my friends. This is not the way that this was done throughout history. So they said, we're a free people. We claim that our rights come from our Creator. He created us to be free. We also have enough sense to realize there has to be law and order in a society for people to be safe, for there to be commerce, for people to have any confidence, that they're going to be paid for the work they've done, all that sort of stuff. To operate in a free society, there has to be laws and enforcement of those laws. And so they sat down and they decided to hash out this thing called the Constitution. And they said that to the American people, they said, in this document, we're basically giving our consent as the governed, giving our consent to a federal government, telling it effectively what it can do. And we're going to be very careful in how we craft this. We're going to make sure that we prevent against tyranny and abuse of power. We're going to be very mindful of the lessons we've learned from history, what we know about human nature, what the Bible, what the Bible teaches us about humanity, right? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. They understood these things. They wrote this down. They said, we're going to be as careful as possible. We're going to spread the power out as much as we can, while at the same time giving the government specific things that we've given our consent to. You have our consent to manage these certain things, to protect us from foreign enemies, to manage interstate, to be able to, manage isn't the right word, but have oversight of interstate commerce, things like that. And so they signed this document, and they said this document, in addition to that, at the end of it, we're going to put the Bill of Rights. We're going to have amendments. We're going to specify at least 10 things. We want to make sure that the government knows just because we've given it this defined power, our consent in these particular areas, they don't get to control everything. There are certain limitations. There are things that we want to make sure that they know, extra certain that they know that we retain the right to free speech, the right to petition our government for a redress of grievances, the right to keep and bear arms. We're watching you, government. We've given you authority, but we haven't given you total authority. Stay in your lane, do your job. Now, that's how this was framed. And you've got your branches of the government, executive branch, legislative branch. I don't want to go through all that, but I'm just painting a picture. There's three branches of government. You've got the executive branch. Well, let's start with the legislative branch. This is Congress. They pass laws, my friends, This is what they do. You have the Senate, you have the House of Representatives. At one point in time, the senators were chosen by state legislatures. I wish we would return to that. Made a whole lot of sense. Certainly, I'm sure there was some corruption going on there, but there's corruption going on with elections of House of Representatives members, which the House of Representatives were elected always directly by the people. And so you have two houses, a bicameral legislature that goes in and that writes laws, right? House and Senate have to agree on identical legislation, all that stuff, to get it to pass with a majority vote. You've got some things, other rules in there like the filibuster. Again, I don't want to go into the weeds with this, but effectively, if both houses pass identical legislation, it goes to the president signs it or vetoes it. There's all these balance of powers and checks and everything else. But legislation is what's supposed to happen in Congress. Then you have the judicial branch, which involves the federal courts and the Supreme Court. They interpret the law. One way of looking at this is they're supposed to be the voice of the Constitution. So they are interpreting laws against the Constitution and against other federal statutes to make sure that the law is applied as intended. This is why it's important to have originalists, people who want to know how the Constitution was meant to be interpreted and understood at the time of its writing by the founders, so that we understand how that was meant to be applied, why they did the things that they did, versus these judicial activists today, which of course that's what the left offers us, are judges who simply take their political beliefs and legislate those from the bench. That's not a good thing. So, of course, we have these battles happening all over the place. But that's the purpose of the judiciary. It's a wise move, good thing to have. It's good to have these separation of powers and these different branches doing things. But then there's the executive branch. The executive branch is the branch that is the chief law enforcement branch. So the executive branch enforces the laws, right? It doesn't do us any good to have laws on the books if they're not enforced. What is the point of that? I know that makes leftists feel good. In fact, I think we're over one of the targets of the brokenness of the radical left's ideology. They are infatuated, fixated, just completely in awe of words. That's why they liked Barack Obama. One of the reasons why they liked him so much was because he said things in such a way that just sounded so nice. This is why leftists fall for the promises of dictators, and they have throughout history. This is why when they were in the gulags in the Soviet Union, they were praising Stalin from the gulags, the very man who put them in said gulags, labor camps, prison camps, and so forth. They love rhetoric. They can't separate words and actions. They can't, for example, I remember after my knee surgeries, back when I was in high school, I tore an ACL my junior year of high school playing football, missed that entire season. Well, I did it in the first game. I think it was the third quarter of the first game, so I missed everything after that. And I remember, being a young man having a pretty major surgery, not on an internal organ, but, to be able to function as an athlete. That's a pretty major injury and surgery to have, especially back in whenever that was, 1994, I guess. Is that right? 94. Anyway, so I remember people coming and visiting me, bringing me things. Someone bought me a book of quotes, and I started reading that thing a lot. In fact, I don't know where that book is, but I used to read that every single day. And I remember one of the quotes. It said, this is paraphrased, but I remember the message of the quote. It said this: "What you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying." That's what I was reading at 15 or 16 years old. That's what I was learning from the wisdom, not from myself, from other people, speaking truth and helping me understand it's not what you say, it's what you do. In fact, that echoes even a biblical passage in the book of James. You show me your faith by what you say. I show you my faith by what I do, James says. Faith without works, he writes, is dead. If you say you believe something and you're not living consistently with what you say that you believe, do you really believe it? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. In a similar way, if you don't believe, if you don't live out what you say, do you really believe it? I think this is one of the many, many incredibly brilliant things about our God, because when he made this world physical, he didn't have to make it physical. We could live in some, whatever he determined, some spiritual world or whatever. It is a spiritual world, but without a physical component. It could be more like what the angels live in. But no, God made a physical world because it gives us the opportunity to live out what we say we believe. The proof is in the pudding, right? When the newborn baby cries at 2 a.m., and some of you may be in that boat right now. Let me tell you, cherish those days. But at the same time, don't overly romanticize them because they're tough. I remember that. I remember telling my wife, when we look back on our kids as they get older and we think about their younger days, I mean, I'm okay with, being reasonable in the memories, but let us not forget how hard this is. But you can choose to demonstrate what you believe, what you really believe. You can say, I love that baby. I want to take care of that baby. That baby is my responsibility. But in order for that to be true, your feet have to hit the floor. You have to walk into that bedroom. You have to feed, soothe, change, whatever is necessary for that baby. And you get to decide. You get to decide what you really believe. You show it by what you do. And it's like the left never learns this. They're so enamored by how people say certain things. They wax poetic or whatever, and it just makes people on the left, I guess, all weak-kneed. It's like a girl who's with a terrible guy because he writes her a love letter and it just sounds so good, but he treats her like crap. This is similar to what we have here. But in today's modern politics and this infatuation with the left and how they attract so many voters. But when the founders, getting back to the point here of the founding and the enforcement mechanism in the Constitution, when the founders broke out, these branches of government, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and then the executive branch. This is the chief branch of enforcement. That's their job. That's the job of the executive branch, is to make sure the laws are enforced. And my friends, the laws haven't been enforced. Many of them haven't. Immigration law certainly wasn't enforced, hasn't been enforced in this nation outside of the time President Trump has been in office. That's the reality of the situation. That's what we're up against. Them's the facts, as I like to say. But what is enforcement? What does it mean for enforcement? I've said on this program before, and I'll say it again, John Stossel's the one who says this a lot. Government is force. Government is force. That in and of itself is a concerning thing because force is not a good thing. When there's force, you've eliminated liberty and choice. Those things are diametrically opposed to one another. But when you say the government is able to step in, when you say the government is being given your consent in a certain area, like the founders basically said in the Constitution and in the founding documents, the ideology, the worldview, the perspective, the foundations for this country. When they said this, they established that there would be force in certain areas. And now listen, the purpose, the thinking, the rationale of the founders, again, was to say, if you look at the correct political continuum, it has anarchy at one end, it has absolute state control of everything at the other. That's the left end. That's where the communists and the fascists and the lovers of big government live, whatever form that government takes. At the other end are the anarchists. They want no rule. The founders understood there has to be some rule, some order, some law, some justice for society, or it can't be orderly. And so they said, we want the smallest government possible, as far from that left end of communism and fascism as possible. We want to be as far from that as possible, but far enough away from the other end to where we actually have law and order. And that's where they landed with the Constitution. In fact, they missed the mark a little bit with the Articles of Confederation. They had to move the government a little bit further to the left, believe it or not, when they went from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. And so they've had to give the government enough teeth to enforce the laws that it was writing and passing. Because again, if they aren't enforceable, if they aren't being enforced, what are they good for? So let's talk about enforcement. That's where we're headed next. But friends, before I do that, a little bit of a pause for me. And let me tell you about one of our partners who's been a partner of ours now, I think for almost 3 years, 2 or 3 years. MyPillow. MyPillow, my friends, creates fantastic products, pillows, sheets, towels, slippers, which Oz has hers on again this morning. It's cold here. She wears them every day, but she may have an extra pair of socks on for all I know in those slippers today. But you can get a lot of quality products that help you, well, live in comfort with MyPillow. Bed sheets, towels, slippers. Of course, they're pillows. MyPillow.com is where you can shop. Mike Lindell, the founder, president of MyPillow, now gubernatorial candidate for the great state of Minnesota. He's the one who started this company. If you want to support an American patriot, by the way, a company that's been targeted, an individual who has been targeted in pretty extreme ways by these radical leftists, being shut down in some of these box stores, being targeted. He's got stories. I can't get into them, but the amount of things he's had to deal with, lawsuits, payment processor stuff, all sorts of things at MyPillow. But this is a guy that loves his country, that loves liberty, that loves the nation I'm explaining here, talking about here this morning on the program. MyPillow.com is where you can go. Promo code Todd is going to get you savings, special offers on, some of these are dramatic savings, by the way. Just use discount code Todd during checkout. Again, MyPillow.com, promo code Todd. Get some good products that give you more comfort and support an American. Well, they're American-made products, and it's an America-first company. So, MyPillow.com, promo code Todd. Timeout's coming here, but when we get back, I want to talk about enforcement. What does that mean? So we know the roles, the responsibilities. So what does it mean to now enforce the law? And specifically, what does it mean to be too aggressive or going too far? I'll answer those questions, my friends, on the other side of the break. Timeout, though, is necessary for me. You're listening here to Conservative, Not Bitter Talk. I am your host, the one and only, the ever so beloved Todd Huff. Back here in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. You know, today's show, this may come as a surprise, and I hesitate in saying it because it could be misunderstood. But I really don't, this may shock you, I don't know. I really don't like politics. What we mean by politics today. I don't like politics. I like talking about what's happening. I like talking about the current event to springboard, I guess, into some of these deeper ideas, which I think, you know, if more people understood the things that we're talking about here, the better off this country would be. But I love talking about what we're talking about today. This is a good place to be for me. And so we're talking about something very specific. We're talking about enforcement. We're talking about, we've laid out the way the government has been set up, why it's set up the way that it is, what branch is responsible for what. We've identified clearly that the executive branch is the branch that makes sure that the law is enforced. In fact, you know, a lot of times people get upset, understandably so. I'm in this category. I'm in this group of people as well sometimes. When we start, hammering on executive orders. But not all executive orders are the same. Not all executive orders are bad. Some people want to say, well, this administration did this many and this one did this many, so that's not acceptable. No, that's not really the right way of looking at it. As is always the case, context matters. Executive orders designed to give direction to the administration to the executive branch on how to enforce, how to interpret the laws and how they're going to be enforced specifically. Not rewriting them, not changing the definitions, but saying, hey, this is how we interpret this. This is how we're going to deal with that. Those are legitimate executive orders because, again, the purpose is to fulfill the law. Now, if you write an executive order that says, hey, we don't like this law, so we're going to do this instead, that's not acceptable. So you see these things, they make more sense when you have, years ago, I heard someone say, the person who knows how will always have a job. The person who knows why will always be the boss. And I would say, whatever you think about that, I would say what is true is the person who knows why will always be able to make sense of these things that we're dealing with politically. If you understand the why, you can really dissect these things and make sense of them. So the executive branch, it's tasked with enforcing the law. Now we have these polls that are saying ICE is too aggressive in enforcing the law and that they've gone too far. Now, what is going too far? Now, this is interesting to me because, again, I go back to the Constitution. And I would say when you go too far in enforcing the law, you've infringed upon someone's constitutional rights, their liberty. That's where things like the Fourth Amendment come into play, right? The protection against warrantless searches and seizures, being secure in your personal effects, your person, your property. You know, government just can't come along and say, hey, you look like you're up to no good. Well, I'm going to do a pat down. I'm going to search your car. I'm going to go search your home. That's not the way that it works. In fact, there's protections against that. Law enforcement would have to go to a judge and say, hey, we need to get a warrant, a search warrant for X, Y, and Z. And this is why we need that. This is why we think we're justified in getting that. The judge can then say yay or nay to that based upon the law, the Constitution, and the burden of proof, of course, being, it's a low burden of proof at that point to get a search warrant, but there is a burden. You just can't write it up. At least you shouldn't be. You shouldn't be able to do that. Of course, you start looking at FISA warrants and how those are almost always granted, and just that in its own thing. I'm not defending how modern culture, modern government has turned into this nightmare. I'm talking about fundamental ideas and principles. That's how it's supposed to work, and those are good to have as our protections. But let's say that there is no violation of your constitutional rights. How far is too far? And see, this is really where it gets interesting to me. And again, we've had these shootings, and it's tragic. It is. It's tragic no matter how much, if at all, these people are responsible for their own circumstances and situation and putting ICE in this predicament. You know what my thoughts are on this. I've shared it on this program here over the past couple of weeks with Renee Good, with Preddy. I've talked about these things. But how far is too far if it's not a violation of your constitutional rights? See, this is where it can really begin to unravel. Because if you're going to say someone is breaking the law enforcement, whatever that law enforcement agency is, ICE in the case of immigration's custom enforcement, Customs and Border Patrol, the FBI, local police forces, your county sheriff, city police, whatever. You've broken the law, and they have to enforce it. And the law says if you do X, you can basically be arrested and you can be tried in a criminal court, whether that be a felony or whether that be a misdemeanor. By the way, that's something else the left is lying to you about or is ignorant about. They say it's not breaking the law to be in this country illegally, which of course is in and of itself is a real head scratcher, because the word illegal means against, breaking the law, against the law sort of thing. So how can you be here against the law without breaking the law? It doesn't make any sense, but they say these sorts of stupid things because they don't understand that there are different types of criminal law, which include felonies at the high end, which include different classes of felonies, and then there's misdemeanors. So there are misdemeanors, and not everything is just a civil offense. By the way, like a traffic ticket. So if you can be, Congress did this deliberately. Congress set it up so that You can enforce immigration law civilly, which makes it easier because there's less of a burden on the government. Instead of trying to try people as criminals and charge them with felonies or misdemeanors, you can just say you're not here legally. Civilly, we're just going to deport you. You're not supposed to be here. You can't prove that you are. We're going to send you out of this country because you can go wherever you want, I guess, but you can't come here, right? It's closing time, right? So that's the way that works. But there's so much confusion, conflating of things. Some of it's deliberate, some of it's ignorance, some of it's just we don't have serious people in many instances teaching our young people about civics and government, or the leftists have gotten control of the reins and they're giving them lies and giving them grievances while not telling them the beauty of our system, the beauty of the Constitution, your rights and all that. But if you've broken the law and someone's not violating your constitutional rights in enforcing that law, what is too far? For example, you can get pulled over for speeding. And let's say the officer says, I'm going to ask you to step out of your car. You know that it's been ruled, Supreme Court has said that if an officer asks you to do that, you have to comply. So you better comply. If you don't comply, if you sit there, and you've seen some of these things, people go on YouTube or whatever, you see people who think they understand their rights and they don't. They're not obeying. And listen, there's also abuse of power by law enforcement. I'm not here to say in instances, it's not a blanket statement, but if a law enforcement officer says, please step out of your car, step out of it. If they're doing something they shouldn't, pursue it later. Deal with it later on. Don't make a scene there, because most of the time you're going to find yourself in a position where you've just escalated the entire situation. And you'll see how much the force part in the word enforcement is a real thing. They can physically pull you out of your car. They can bust your your side window out if you've locked yourself in the car. You can be slammed to the ground. This is not going to end well. And so some people say, well, that's going too far. Well, the problem is, if you're disobeying the law, if you don't let law enforcement take care of it, even physically, I'm not saying with the use of deadly force, but just physically, then you've completely neutered the entire system. And I'm not a fan of this stuff, but to pretend like this is all on law enforcement and not on the person who's broken the law or who's being alleged to have broken the law, problems are going to arise. And what are you supposed to do if you're a law enforcement officer? So, break is in order. Timeout is in order, my friends. Before I take that break, though, if you're curious about Kratom or you just want honest answers before you try anything, you are invited to the weekly tea talk from Christopher's Organic Botanicals. It happens every Thursday night, which that is today, my friends, 7 p.m. Eastern. No pressure, no sales pitch, just real conversation with real people who want to help you understand Kratom, what it is, how it's used, how to stay safe, what to avoid. They believe, Christopher's Organic Botanicals believes, education should come first. That's what sets them apart from these shady sellers, from the people who cut corners and push a product. Sometimes it's synthetic and dangerous. Christopher's doesn't do any of that. They want you to be informed. If you've got questions about anything, relief, dosage, safety, sourcing, that's the place to ask. They built a community that's focused on truth, not hype. 7 p.m. Eastern tonight. It's in I'm going to put a link in our newsletter. If you want to sign up for that at toddhuffshow.com, you'll get it. Or go to Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com for more information. Truth, tradition, transparency. Time out for me. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Final segment here, talking about enforcement. Talking about how this has to be done. I mean, tell me where I'm wrong on this, my friends. Where I'm wrong on what we've laid out here today, how the law has to be enforced. That's where we're headed here in the final segment to hopefully wrap this up. And by the way, I mentioned it last segment. I don't want to overdo it, but I do expound upon this in the newsletter. There's additional stuff I can't get to that I'll write about in the newsletter. You'll have all the background information of the program. You'll have a summary, some other thoughts, and sometimes additional content about this very issue. And this is critical to understand. So if you haven't done so, I'd love to have you sign up. It's totally free. Our free email newsletter called The Inner Circle, toddhuffshow.com. Just go to the website. You can sign up there. But friends, maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels like juggling more than just numbers. You've got tax planning, estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when Family Office Services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services give you access to a coordinated team with advanced option strategies, private credit, private equity, legal expertise, all those things under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for the future, making sure your legacy stays strong for generations. If you're ready for that next level of support, head on over to fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com, my friends. Jason and his team will take very good care of you, build your legacy, secure your future with Full Suite Wealth. Okay, so when I left you last segment, we were at the point talking about enforcement. I used an analogy, an example. You get pulled over, but you refuse to comply. Law enforcement is able to make sure that you comply. As I said at the beginning, government is force. This is why, by definition, it is dangerous to have a big government. Big government means big force, or a force that can be applied in all sorts of areas of your life, in my life. That's not a good thing. We want choice. We want liberty. We want freedom. But there are certain areas, in order to maintain a civil society, a safe society, a society that respects law and order, there are certain areas where the force is necessary. For example, if you go into a bank, would not recommend that you do this. You go into a bank and you threaten to, steal the money. Give me the money or I'll do this. I've got to, you threaten them. You say you have a gun or whatever. Law enforcement has the right to come in and to apprehend that person. And by the way, what happens if that person does have a gun? What happens if that person threatens to use that gun against another citizen, against an officer? What happens? That it is completely and 100% justifiable for the officers to use deadly force. So now we're talking about enforcement all the way up to the point of potentially killing a person. And by the way, this is another thing. When I listen to these stories, the way that this stuff is covered in the media, it's either so idiotic, moronic, or just disingenuous when they say, this person was apprehended, there was a scuffle, whatever happened, right? I don't want to get into the specifics because everybody, it's easy to emotionalize one case, but just let's take all names out of this. And let's say that there's a situation where someone is not complying with law enforcement. It gets physical. There's a gun involved, or someone thinks he has a gun involved. They think he's reaching for it, whatever's happening in that moment of chaos. And the officers believe that there's a legitimate threat that someone can be killed or seriously harm themselves or someone right there. And so they grab their weapons and in a split second, fire that weapon. You're supposed to fire that weapon. You're not supposed to fire and hit them in the leg and just say, hey, don't do that. And they say, okay, I should think about that. That kind of hurts. I got shot in the leg. No, you, at that point, when you've decided to deploy deadly force, when you've decided that you're justified in using your weapon, you have now decided that you have the right. It's a terrible position to be in, but to protect yourself and to protect other people, you have the right to stop that person no matter what, up to the point where they actually die. It's a terrible position. It is a terrible position to put people in. So you fire the weapon until the threat is neutralized, until the threat is no more. And so when people say they shot him 10 times or 6 times, I mean, my goodness, do they think all of these shots are hitting the exact target that they're aiming for, center mass and so forth? I mean, it's terrible. I fully agree with you that it's terrible. My question is, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? Are you just supposed to say, you know what? You're getting a little bit too aggressive with me. I'm just going to let you go. What's that going to do? There's people out there. You see other cities that's in the stack of stuff, other cities that are responding in kind. Some people say Trump has kind of capitulated on Minnesota, Minneapolis. I don't know. I'm still determining what I think on some of this. It's possible. But how else do you enforce the law? You either enforce it even when they fight back, when they threaten you. I mean, at what point do you say, I can't do anything? When they start yelling, when they put hands on? I mean, I understand it's a bad position, but if you don't have the willingness to see it all the way through, you don't really have enforcement. And that's the bottom line. I've got to go, my friends. Have a good day. SDG.